Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're here today with Nathan Smolensky, author of a new book titled Common Ground from the Ground Up, How Rethinking Politics Can Help Us Feel Heard, Heal Relationships, and Fix Our Democracy. Nathan is a member of Braver Angels, as well as several other organizations in the space of depolarization and political innovation. He grew up in the bleeding heart of liberal Massachusetts, raised in a family of Soviet immigrants for whom socialism and big government were the ultimate evil. From early on, he became aware of the damage caused by our divisions and of the senseless conflict mentality that permeates our politics. Today, he is an author, strategist, and consultant focused on making a better kind of politics, both more accessible to the common citizen and more viable in the political arena. Having worked with Republicans, Democrats, and a wide range of third-party independent players, he sees what it takes to overcome differences and bridge divides. You can learn more at his website, nathansmolensky.com. That's NathanSmolensky.com. So welcome, Nathan, and congratulations on your new book.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So is there anything else that you would like folks to know about you than what I kind of briefly touched on there?
I mean, you pretty much laid it all out, so I don't think I have a ton to add, just a little more about me beyond the world of politics. I am a very avid chess player, player
Hmm.
of many games. I think more and more over the years, I've come to realize that problem solving is a core of what drives me. And so I am someone who, from an early age, was fascinated by policy making and what the platonic ideal of that, I suppose, could be of how do you make this work? How do you make that work? How do you balance this and that? And just so off put by what politics actually was.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that kind of drove me to the position I am today.
Well, since I'm originally an engineer, the whole problem
Hmm.
solving thing was, important to me too, but kind of more in the math and physics and, engineering realm. But I still think that authors, need to do that in their books. So many books are maybe great at analysis, but not necessarily great at problem solving. And,
Right.
that to me, that's the important crux of the matter. So we'll talk more about your book, but I think it does that. So that's really good. So I mentioned, you're involved with some other things, political consulting, strategy, communications. Can you just share with folks a little bit more about what you do in that arena?
So I do whatever I can to best move the needle. So I was director of the Florida Forward Party, which was a minor party, is a minor party within the state of Florida from 2022 to late last year. I've worked with different candidates through that, just helping to guide on messaging, strategic positioning, helping talk through things. I also try to do a little more speaking, and I'll be doing quite a bit of that with the book, hoping to just reach audiences and find any way I can to make an impact. It is not how I do this work that is ultimately my end goal, but just being able to drive towards a healthier political mindset and ultimately a more productive politics. And I am very flexible as far as how I go about that. So
Good,
this
good,
book
good.
is in many ways an extension of that.
Yeah, sure, sure. For a lot of authors, a book really complements their consulting work and other efforts, speaking efforts in particular. So
True.
that's very good. So as you said, you served as a state director. You also ran for office, and now you're focused more on messaging and strategies. Do you have any inkling of going back into either of the earlier two?
Probably won't be running for office again anytime soon. It is an intense undertaking. I like to have a little more flexibility as far as how I live my life. I also feel like my greatest contributions that I can make are the ideas that I'm sharing anyway, of the philosophy, so they can be championed by anyone else. And if it's not persuasive enough for others to take on the mantle, then it wouldn't be persuasive enough within any legislative body
Mhm.
or wherever I might find myself.
Interesting.
So Yeah, I probably won't be doing a lot of that. Um, but we'll see where the winds take me and how this book is received and other projects are received.
Good. So let's get into the book. As I mentioned, the title is Common Ground from the Ground Up, How Rethinking Politics Can Help Us Feel Heard, Heal Relationships, and Fix Our Democracy. So can you tell us a little bit about the background of that book and how it came about?
This was a project that I started to really think about late in my tenure as director of the Florida Forward Party. A lot of what drove it is the sense of we're struggling to reach people because we're talking a lot about depolarization. We're talking a lot about the duopoly. We are talking about these concepts where if you are not within our in-group, you're going to struggle to understand this.
Hmm.
And this I realized was a messaging blocker. And it was limiting our reach, it was limiting our audience. And the way that we had become predisposed to talking about politics, whatever those politics were, is to energize, to speak to our in-group, to those who are already in agreement and say, guys, let's turn up. Let's give money. Let's chip in. Let's all work together. Let's volunteer. Let's do all of this towards this effort. And it is fundamentally a difficult means of growing an audience.
Hmm.
We were trapped in our own bubble to a degree. And what I realized is that that challenge, that struggle of being kind of in your bubble and not having the tools to escape beyond it is really universal.
Yes,
That
absolutely.
there would be a way to appeal to people to break through divides, not necessarily with the end goal of healing, because not everyone is bought into that to start. Not everyone cares so much about how they behave, the civility of their discourse as end goals within themselves. These have something of a limited appeal. But if you can convey that these are ways to reach beyond your bubble, to reach people that you may not have thought reachable before, then there is a huge value because that challenge of not being able to move other people to where you stand to understand you better and understand your beliefs better is shared among a huge, huge portion of the populace.
Hmm. Interesting. So, who would you say the book is most intended for then?
So there are a few pieces to this. I think I try to be as realistic and as practical as I can with what that initial audience is going to be. And the initial audience is those who are interested in the healing aspect of it, those who are interested in the bridge building aspect of it for the sake of itself. But what I want to do with this book is give the people within this space something that they can pass along to a friend or a relative or anyone in their lives who really needs it. Because this is ultimately about becoming the best communicator you can be, becoming the best champion and advocate of your ideas and your beliefs that you can be through the means of understanding one another better, through the means of finding a common language, through the means of rethinking how we perceive political disagreement, how we perceive the end goals of political debate, and how we perceive politics as a whole. So again, in short, it is for those in the bridge building space and for them to pass along to those outside of the bridge building space.
So, more or less for the general public as opposed to
Yes,
politicians or strategists or political marketing folks?
absolutely, absolutely. And one thing I want to say to clarify one of these initial cruxes, that idea of how we're predisposed to talking about politics, of speaking to our bubble, energizing people rather than persuading them, that does work in electoral politics to a degree. In terms of short-term returns, the reason that's so prevalent is because if it's effective, is because, hey, if all of your followers are tuned in to these cable news channels where you're speaking, you're not really going to reach beyond that audience very easily anyway. And the more effective thing is to energize them. So it works for politicians, it works for media, it doesn't work for common people trying to understand and get through to relatives, to friends, to those that they find political disagreement with in their lives. And so that is much more the use
Interesting.
case.
Interesting. And much larger audience too. So that's good.
Absolutely.
So there's a particular statement in the
Hmm.
book that you make that I just love. You say the common ground we need to, excuse me, let me start that over. The common ground we need is defined not by the things we agree upon, but by our ability to face everything else. I love that. I've heard most people focus on the former rather than the latter, and I like your approach better, quite frankly. What led you to that?
And that I think early on is a realization of we can focus on the things we agree on and try to almost contort these statements of belief or statements of philosophy as, well, there's some shared material here. That brushes over at times the things we disagree on. And what it does achieve, focusing on that common ground, is sort of a humanization, is sort of saying, well, we at least agree on this, right? So we can get along when it's about that. But that doesn't deal with the greater issue, which is there are these fundamental things we disagree on. They're, whether you want to call them fundamental or not, these are deeply important. The stakes are very high. And our perception of the conflict around these issues is very intense. It is very stressful for people. It is draining for people. And we need to be able to face that disagreement. And this goes back to my problem solving outlook, to that sort of driving mentality. Disagreement does not have to be a bad thing. It is not someone trying to hurt you.
Right. That's
It
right.
is your idea can grow by being challenged. You can help grow another's idea by
Absolutely.
challenging it.
Right.
And embracing that allows us to engage in a more full debate without necessarily agreeing on the rules, without having to focus on just this shared area and emphasizing that. We can deal with the disagreement. We can embrace that disagreement and allow it to drive to a better way to solve very, very difficult problems together. And I think that's just much more valuable than, again, focusing on, well, we agree on this and that, when it's fluff that doesn't speak to the issues, doesn't speak to what people are actually concerned about.
I'll come back to this topic
Mm.
more in a moment. Let me read another statement from the book. Between 2000 and 2016 elections, the top fundraiser won over 90% of all the races for the U.S. House and some 80% of those for the Senate. Political action committees account for the majority of funds raised for almost every U.S. legislative campaign as of 2018. So as we've seen, rich people and rich companies can buy elections. Other than overturning the ruling on Citizens United, what can we do about that?
So that statement is not necessarily as declarative as it might seem. And there's some text that follows it where I do get into this is more of a correlation than a causation. What I mean by that is people like to bet on winners, especially if you are of any kind of special interest. Giving your money to the candidate who's going to lose, well, you just lose that money. Giving money to the candidate who's going to win, well, this is a way of ensuring trust, loyalty, whatever you want to call it, good feelings. There's more incentive there. There are a lot of those elections where if you look at the political makeup of the area, of the district, of the state, they're pretty lopsided anyway. And once you start factoring in for these confounding variables, once you start factoring in for, just the political expectations and differences that are already there. It's not necessarily as causative, as declarative, as determinative as it might seem. And there are also more and more ways within our social media landscape to run lean, to effectively get public outreach without spending as much money, to effectively reach a lot of people without necessarily having the big ads, without having all of this. And I talk about how players can spend and this and that. So yes, there are going to be those efforts to exploit whatever the system allows you to exploit. And I would argue even if you did have something like Citizens United overturned, there are a lot of ways to subtly support candidates, to indirectly support campaigns that are really, really tough to all close down. And even within our system, even within the rules that we have, and we'll get into more of this, I think, later in the conversation, there are ways to come closer to challenging the powers that be, or whatever you want to call them, the presumptive favorites, more strategically and more effectively than people might realize.
Hmm. Well, that's interesting because I mean, I've been doing a lot of online marketing myself over the last several years, and then I
Yeah.
found it to be more difficult year after year.
Oh, yeah.
The tools that, we had 5, 10 years ago were more effective, I found to be at reaching an audience and right audience and have them react. Um, and uh, reading what marketing experts that I do, it's like it's become such a game of who spends the most in order to get attention online. And even outside of, traditional social media marketing, I mean, who spends the most money on buying influencers,
Sure.
and subsidizing them, podcasters, whoever, so I'm a little bit skeptical, quite frankly, about this subject because it just feels that the things I've seen, and I don't have as much of an in-depth view of the political machinations as you do, but at least what I've seen is that money is just driving the politics like crazy.
Money is very powerful, and there are always new ways to exploit the
Yeah,
system that are
yeah,
being found. This is
yeah.
why it's a very tricky fix.
Mm.
Removing money from politics is an enormous effort, and you have to be sure to plug all of these holes. Now, working against the money, overcoming the advantage of money in politics, that's where you have to be a little creative with it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that is more what I touch on there. But I think there's more viability there than people realize. And frankly, I think a part of that is creating the wave of cultural sentiment and the wave of cultural hunger for something new that suits a certain ethos that addresses the fatigue that a lot of us have with politics. People look at the unpopularity of our sitting Congress, for example, or our sitting president, who is, I haven't tracked the president. I think he's in somewhere the 30s
Hmm.
typically around popularity. The Congress normally hovers closer to 20% as far as are they doing a good job. People look at this and see, well, they keep getting reelected, and it's a cause for despair. It's a cause for, well, money has solved politics, not in a good way, and that kind of outlook. But it's an opportunity. It is realizing that there is a lot of hunger for something new. If you can present it viably, credibly, impactfully, and you can understand the limitations, the bounds of this problem to solve, I think there is that to work on because no amount of money that you can funnel is going to overcome that tremendous amount of fatigue and unhappiness with the direction of our current politics.
Well, setting aside the messaging and the
Hmm,
content for a moment, what
sure.
communication channels have you seen to be effective, given all the noise, given all the fatigue, particularly of online marketing?
As far as breaking through the noise, I do think that honestly, the long form podcast medium is one of the best at sort of driving thoughtful conversation and driving people to listen to thoughtful conversation. That has been one of the more hopeful things. If it's super quick sound bites, those are a lot easier to create artificially, to manipulate, to pay influencers to, just machine gun out to whatever extent that you should want. So it's that long form stuff that I think has promise. And as far as and this speaks to another part of the book's angle and why I hope that it may be positioned in the long term for some success and some reach beyond the typical political audience, is that there's a lot of hunger for self-improvement. There's a lot of hunger for healing, not necessarily on a societal level, not necessarily to start, but on a personal level. People are struggling with the world around them and are looking for ways to make sense of it and find avenues to make a positive difference. And that hunger leads people to some places. I think, again, I'll go to the long form podcast and the success of that. That self-improvement space and that broader space of spiritual reconciliation and introspection, I think draws a lot of people and draws a lot of people who are tired of the noise that you
Mhm.
may not hear from as much, but they're absolutely there.
Mhm.
And if you can speak to them powerfully, that message can spread.
Mhm. Yeah, I believe that too. So as you know, I've been a member of Braver Angels and published two books in the How to Heal Our Divides series. In your book, you point out that fledgling efforts in the bridge building space may lack the critical mass needed to
Mm.
build momentum and will struggle in particular to bring in those who need healthy discourse the most. I totally agree with that. Let's separate that into two questions. First, what will it take to overcome the critical mass? Is some consolidation required?
Consolidation can ultimately be valuable. I think consolidation comes once you have something that has proven more effective than the rest. So before you can have consolidation, you need iteration. You need to see, all right, these are slightly different processes, slightly different approaches. What is getting the most impact? What is getting the strongest response, the most energy? And you see what's sort of resonating with people. And then to the other part of that question of the critical mass, it is getting out of our bubble again, is making an appeal to those who may not be already sold on how do we heal our divides? How do we create better conversations? Because that is not everyone's goal. That is not what everyone looks at as an objective. And so this is, again, what my book is trying to do and what others are trying to do in different ways of branching and crossing over into different spaces. This is better political communication as a means of self-improvement, understanding different perspectives better, being able to handle those conversations better as a means of becoming the best communicator, the best political thinker, the best champion of the things you value that you can be. And that crossing over, that crossover potential into the space of, again, self-improvement is what excites me about this project, is what I think can drive, whether it's my book, whether it's another effort, and whether it's crossing over into a different realm, a potential for audience growth and some critical mass. The critical mass really comes when media start paying attention to it, when it becomes talked about at a more household level, when it starts to have a political impact. That goes a huge, huge, huge way. So it doesn't take as much as I think people worry that it does, but it does take a pretty significant breakthrough to start.
So, we've both been involved with Brave Rangers.
Mm,
There's other, organizations that are doing similar kinds of things like crossing party lines or vote
sure.
common good. You've probably been involved in more than I have. Are there any that you see out there that have got the potential to be the lead, so to speak, and the consolidator?
Not not yet, and this is not to speak ill of any one of them. Those that are operating within the bridge building space are fostering conversations, and all of the ones that I've seen are doing great good. I'll highlight some of the ones that are more in the collegiate space and doing workshops. There's the Constructive Dialogue Institute, which is a really interesting project started by Jonathan Haidt, who honestly might be one of the sort of, not necessarily breakout, but a potential real leader and real champion of this cause in many ways, just bringing attention to this thoughtful analysis of why we've come to this point of division and seemingly irreconcilable difference within this country and beyond. Yeah, I'm not, beyond that, I don't want to really speak for one as a point of consolidation because there's not necessarily that much practicality in calling for consolidation now. Let's see which one people really latch onto. And more than consolidation, I would say a really valuable thing is cross promotion.
Yeah,
Whatever
yeah.
organization you may be a part of, whichever you support, encourage other members of that organization. There's usually no conflict of interest
No,
to
I mean,
just
that's exactly
explore
what I was
others.
trying to achieve with this. This
Oh
is
yeah.
a set of essays about organizations doing this kind of work, because I realize that it's so fragmented, and the cross, support that you mentioned a moment ago, I think is critical.
Yeah. I mean, there's also beyond the bridge building space, there's the political innovation space, which is how do you get more of a unifying message within to into the halls of power. And that is where you really get a lot of fragmentation. And this I've been very up close with. And I talk about it in the book as something I like to call the box problem, which is when you have all these thinkers and the most dynamic, independent-minded thinkers share this ethos of don't put me in a box for my beliefs. I'm not going to conform to this rigid ideology or that rigid ideology. The solution to bring them together and to capture that spirit is not to say, well, have you tried the third rigid box of ideology?
Really.
Ultimately, yeah, because if you have one independent-minded thinker and all their policies become the policies of this new party, all their ideas become the ideas of this new party and it just becomes as rigid, well, it's going to be that one independent-minded thinker and whoever agrees with them, which is fine. It can do great things, but it's not going to attract
Yeah.
the other
Yeah.
sort of independent minds.
Well, I mean, I've told other people that I've never found anyone, when you get down to all the details of either politics or religion, that I agree with 100% on everything.
Sure.
And, I'll bet there's a lot of people that if they were honest about it and, you know, looked at some of those details, they'd conclude the same thing. So you can't have the rigidity of purism, of party affiliation or whatever. So one thing I like about your book, and we talked about it before, is
Mm.
problem analysis. You're making some recommendations about what we do about it, and a big part of that are the tools for healthy conversations that you bring to the surface and talk about. Can you touch on those?
The tools for healthy conversation, sure. A lot of it is trying to develop the right mindset around conversation. That's the first big step. One of the things I talk about is applying the golden rule. If you want to go into a conversation and have someone open their mind to what it is you have to say, the best way to do that, and this is counterintuitive for a lot of people, is to open your mind to what they have to say.
Listen.
You start by listening, you hear them out, you show genuine curiosity, and a lot of the book is just motivating that curiosity, is showcasing it is incredible how differently we perceive the problems in our society, how differently we perceive our world. And getting to see some of those differences, it is almost like scientific discovery. It is something magical about it. And one of the biggest things that's been able to drive me to hold the conversations I've been able to hold with a wide range of political speakers and thinkers is I genuinely want to know. So starts with that mindset of curiosity, showing that open mind, because once you start listening, you let them speak, then the temperature drops, and then more often than you may expect, they will say, well, what about you? What do you think about all of this? Beyond that, there is a lot that I talk about when it comes to language, language around the issues, language around, okay, how is it I'm presenting this idea? Is it a moral declarative? Is it, I believe that housing is a human right? That explains where your belief comes from. But if someone doesn't share that moral declarative, that moral assertion, doesn't encourage them to agree with you really at all. It is showing what team you're on. This is how we've become accustomed to talking about politics.
Yeah.
And the most productive way, the way you start to really bounce off, is by driving it a little more to, okay, what kind of policy can we make around this? What are we going to do about this problem? To what extent does it really work? How do we gauge how it really works? Again, working to find the best possible solutions. We all gain from good policy. We all gain from effective policy. We are very far from that. There are trade-offs when we have the Platonic ideals of this policy will do X, this policy will do Y. We're very far from that. We need to understand, all right, how effective would making this difference in the law be? What would be the potential for error? And a huge amount of the differences in sentiment are where we see the greatest potential for error and specifically for abuse of power. Corporations, given unchecked power, given excess power, can abuse them at the detriment of the common citizenry and of the society. This is true. The government, given excess power and unchecked power, can misuse or create large inefficiencies or be exploited to the detriment of the common citizen, of the free enterprise, of all of these things. These things coexist. These are all elements that add to our understanding of issues. And that is the framework, part of the framework by which I talk about, all right, how can we engage more productively? How can we engage more constructively? And that gets extended a little. I talk a little about toolboxing. Toolboxing is what I like to call just embracing a new idea as not contrary to whatever idea you might have, but as adding to the set of possible solutions. And realizing that that is more additive than it is a fight between these ideas. Once you get to that stage, then you can really get into a conversation mode, which is bouncing ideas, sharing perspectives, and learning. That ultimately is the goal of that conversation. Learn, find the best ways to solve these really, really, really complicated problems and to contribute to that discussion. And if you have that mindset and you have those tools, I think you get a lot more fruitful discussions.
Part of the discouragement for me is that it seems year after year, month after month, that there are fewer and fewer people interested in having those kinds of conversations, right? And you mentioned a couple of things in your book that, speak to this that I think are really good analogies. One is the politics of sport, the other one's the politics of religion. And in both of those instances, people tend to be, I root for Auburn, end of story. I root for political party X, end of story. They don't want to talk about, the nuances of, policy or listening or engagement.
Yeah, and that speaks to a few things. So politics is sport, politics is religion. There is a philosophical conversation that underlies that, which is the void that a lot of people have that can get filled by politics.
Hmm. Hmm.
The way I like to distinguish those, politics as sport, politics as religion, politics as sport speaks to when politics serves the role of giving you a sense of community, of giving you a sense of belonging. Ultimately, that is what sports fandom does. And when you cheer for a team, it's a deeply emotional connection, not just to the team, but to the other fans. You win together, you lose together. These challenges of our team didn't get there. Oh man, the other team, the refs kind of screwed us. All of these things build up this sense of community and belonging and show that you're on the same side, you're together. Having politics fill in for that leads to a very often unhealthy approach to discussing politics or following politics, where you lose sight of the fact that when we are not able to have civility, when we are not able to have effective discourse, when we are not able to have effective governance, that we kind of need these things to build up, we're all losing. And it's deeply, deeply exploitable, this emotional connection or emotional dependency on politics. When it becomes religion, this is where I see politics filling the void of affirmation. When you are asked what makes you a good person, if your answer is your politics or the things you do in service of your politics, that may lend itself to a kind of relationship with your beliefs that is not conducive to debate, say uh, to say the least. And again, there is that void that people are looking to fill, this sense of purpose. When we're having this conversation, this is shortly after a number of deeply tragic cases of political violence. And to some extent, this is speculative on my part, but the sense that people seeking purpose find it through acts of expressing their politics more and more, find it through this religious view of politics as a battle of good against evil, of politics in these dramatic terms, it leads to these cases. And so my point, what I'm doing with the book and what I talk about in that chapter when I explore these psychological relationships we can have is regardless of whether they're justified, regardless of how you feel about that sense of community, how you feel about the morality that underlies your politics and how deeply it connects to your beliefs. These things, these mentalities around politics hold us back as communicators. They limit us. When we're talking about it as sports fans, if I say go Auburn, that doesn't convince anyone to cheer for Auburn. And if I say, this is my deeply held belief, well, it shows the strength of my conviction, but it doesn't really encourage anyone to share my conviction who doesn't already. And that limits us. And this is, again, my angle that I approach it at.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, a lot of people's answer today to those is just brute force, right? and we're seeing in the violence. And one of the titles of a chapter in your book, I thought really gets at the root of this reality. The title you say is The Insatiable Lust for Power That Drives Us All. And to me, that's the crux of the matter at the end of the day is power and control. And we're seeing that in spades these days.
It it can be. It can be viewed as the problem, but again, it drives us all, and that's without exception. And I think it drives us to a point where we're at here in this conversation, is that wanting to express, to have an impact, to have agency in not only one's own fate, but in the well-being of the society around them. This is a common driver that can be used for and can be contorted for evil,
Yep,
but can also be driven for
absolutely.
good. There
Absolutely.
is no value in me trying to empower anyone if nobody wants power. That's the entire market demand for empowerment is people who want power. And, the good comes with the bad. That's ultimately how I think it's most valuable to talk about these things. And again, that is the angle that this book approaches the problem at, is not to tell people, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we could all get along, but to empower people through these tools of being able to have more conversations, to heal relationships in their lives, and for those who should pursue that route to become more effective players within the space of electoral politics, to make more of a political difference. All of these things are means to empower. All of these things are means to drive positive change through that appeal to, you know. And by the way, the title of that section is meant to be sort of humorously over the top. And, but yeah,
I
tapping
wish that
into
were
that,
true. I wish that were true.
the insatiable lust for power that drives us all.
I mean, it is
It's
over
a
the top. I won't,
strong phrasing.
I won't argue that, but all I'm saying is that to me, that has been the seed of the increasing hostility, the increasing problems that we've had, is
Well, it's
control and power.
yes. I think we're naturally driven to that. It is what vehicle do people have? What vehicles do people have to express that, to find agency, to make an impact? If you are having this political environment where people feel like they're not being heard, they have a more and more dramatic sense of the stakes at hand. And they feel, and to this I lay the blame on the policymakers, they feel that the government will not solve these problems, that they are obligated to take things into their own hands more and more. This is what drives extreme behavior. But that initial impetus of, I want agency, I want to make an impact, I want to leave a legacy, all of these things that we see as wanting for power, I think they come with the good as much as they come with the bad. It is what forms of expression and what outlets are available for people to find that. And I
So,
don't think, also, I don't think you can remove that from the equation. People will have that, and it is where you drive it
mhm.
that ultimately matters.
So I know writing this book was very important to you. Now that it's done and released out into the world, what was writing it meaning? What did writing it mean to you?
And there were a lot of ideas I wanted to put to paper. A lot of things I wanted to express that I was happy to do so with. And at this point, it is, again, a vehicle to try to make a difference. And whether it's promoting this book, speaking in association with this book, doing anything else to support these ideas, shifting more towards short form or wherever the road should take me, my job is not done. So I don't think it will be for a long, long time, sadly, but I do want to see it make an impact. That is ultimately what matters more than finishing the book is how it reaches people, how it touches people. This is not something I can claim as a purely artistic endeavor. It is an effort to move forward a better way of political thinking and to try to move the needle.
Well, amen. We badly need it. Um, so I realize you're in the midst of, a lot of work to launch this book, but can I ask you about anything future? Are there any other books or other projects that you're able to talk about at this point?
No, no other books planned for now. Um, I do get these little inklings of inspiration, but I also try not to get ahead of myself. So right now, it is just seeing how much good I can do with this, how much good I can do with the position I'm in. And if anyone has any suggestions around that, any of your listeners or and anything along the lines of speaking somewhere, doing a signing, working with them on a project, and this applies to you as well. I'm more than open to ideas like that. I'm very excited to see where this next chapter of the journey should lead me.
Good, good. Well, Nathan, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks so much for doing this work. I know how difficult, how much work it is to put together a book and then to market it and speak about it and travel, and it's a grind. So again, I encourage people to check this out. Common Ground from the Ground Up, How Rethinking Politics Can Help Us Feel Heard, to heal relationships and fix our democracy. And again, find out more at Nathan's website, nathansmolensky.com. Nathan, thank you again, and I really wish you the best with all of your work.
Thank you so much. I wish you all the best as well, and to all of your listeners as well. Have an amazing day and take care.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.